Hello, everybody. Sunday Adelaja here. I'm back to you with our lesson and our teaching, the series that I'm doing now about Black African people. Are Black African people cursed? Well, that's what we're examining today. No, they are not cursed. Blacks built one of the greatest civilizations and one of the greatest empires in Europe. And many of you will find it difficult to believe, but yesterday, if you watch what we discussed, you will see the way I'm developing the topic further. So let's go and see the topic of today, which is Black Spain was a cultural center of Europe. So there was a time that black people mainly were ruling over Spain, and that they used to be called Moors or Mauritanians. If you know the Mauritanians, if you go to the map, you see Mauritania. There are black people there. It's an African country up till now. And the people who ruled over Europe were those same Mauritanians. They called them Moors. They were black people, so that's why I call it Black Spain was a cultural center of Europe. So let's assume that we know that the Moors ruled over Spain. Were they the cultural center of Europe? Okay, they were the most developed part of Europe. And you don't need to believe me. I wrote this book, How Africans Brought Civilization to Europe. It's full of researches, and my teaching today is going to be based on pure research. I'm just going to read. I'm not going to, there is nothing from me to say, just going to read to you the history, that things that are documented in history and things that cannot be denied by anybody. The only accent that I'm doing is to pay the attention to the fact that these people are black people. Okay, so Black Spain was a cultural center of Europe. And the blacks we are talking about are the Mauritanians, the Moors. So this teaching is an antidote and a vaccine for racism that we have to inject into the veins of the global community and people of every country. So the Moors, who are the Mauritanians or the blacks, introduced silk industry. Just for you to know that they were the most progressive, they were the most culturally advanced people of Europe that time. So they introduced silk industry in Spain and all of Europe at that point. There was nothing like that in the rest of Europe too. In agriculture, they introduced cultivation of rice, sugar cane. They started it in Europe. Cultivation of rice, sugar cane, that's ginger, cotton, lemon, and strawberries. People were looking like this, just like me and you. The handbook on agriculture, written in the 12th century by Ibn al-Awam, was still being published even in 1802 for training of Spanish farmers. Ibn Khaldun wrote on the economy, and his works are still relevant today. Now, of course, when these Moors were there, the Mauritanians, there were Arabs among them, so because they were Muslims. The Arabs had, conquered Africa at that time, the North Africa, and they are the ones who converted these Moors to be Muslims, and so they were mixed, but it was like 1 to 4th. The original people that conquered Europe, there are 400 black people and only 100 blacks, so Arabs, so there were Arabs among them too. In his historic work, the Mukaddima, in Introduction to History, Ibn Khaldun analyzed the reasons for the rise and decline of countries and nations. He discovered a vast number of fundamental notions in economics, and you will be surprised by what this black man discovered. This man discovered what even Adam Smith had not discovered, which Adam Smith discovered much more later. Ibn Khaldun was a writer of black origin that had written so much discoveries on economic laws. Even before Scotsman Adam Smith, this man discovered value and necessity of division of labor. He also was ahead of Englishman David Ricardo in discovering the labor theory of value and examined the role of the state in stabilizing the economy before Englishman John Keynes. His teachings make it possible to predict whether a state is viable, as well as give an empirical and theoretical explanation of the effects that state policy has on production and trade. As early as in the 14th century, it stated that the price of goods and services was determined by demand and supply. Moors were also skilled engineers. During the rule of Emir Abd al-Rahman III, water supply system with lead pipes was built to transport water from the mountains to Cordoba. That's a city in Spain. A piece of a beautiful irrigation system built by Moorish engineers, those are black engineers, was preserved till today. You can still see it till today. They also designed huge underground bunkers for grain storage in case of emergency. They started this kind of irrigation too. Gold, silver, copper, mercury, tin, lead, iron, and alum were extensively mined up to the 12th century. Maritime trade of Saracen. Now, when they talk about Saracen, it's talking about the mixture of both blacks and Arabs. They were just Muslims. In the Mediterranean, exceeded the rest of Europe. Hundreds of ships were used in trade, and its volume stimulated production. Sword blades produced in Toledo, that was the then part of Spain, were of the highest quality and the most elegant, but they were under the rule of these Moors that time. The most elegant in all of Europe, and a factory near Cordoba produced 12,000 sheets per year. The city of Murcia was known for production of all kinds of brass and iron tools, and I told you already about Moor, this black. That's like that city is known as this black people's city. Was known for the production of all kinds of brass and iron tools. Tenerife and Cordoba and Morocco were the best in the world. Already in the 10th century, that became the golden age of the Mauritanian, that's Moor, the black Spain. The city of Cordoba looked almost like a modern city, like a modern city today. It was looking like today. The roads were beautifully paved with sideway walks for pedestrians. At night, it was possible to walk 10 kilometers under the light of lanterns, like street lights, along a continuous series of houses on both sides of the road, and this existed hundreds of years before the first paved road appeared in Paris and the first street lantern in London. So this was there before, even it's hundreds of years before street lights and paved road appeared in Paris and London. So they had paved roads, they had street lights hundreds of years before it appeared anywhere else. The population of the city was 1 million inhabitants, which exceeded the population of Germany, France, England, and Italy, while the rest of Europe did not have a city with more than 30,000 inhabitants. So Europe was backward that time, and these black people were building, modern cities. The city had 200,000 houses, 800 public schools, many colleges and universities, 10,000 wealthy palaces surrounded by beautiful gardens, not to mention the royal palaces. In Cordoba, there were 5,000 mills, like companies, factories, while in the rest of Europe there were none. There were 900 public baths, not counting countless private ones, while in the rest of Europe they were considered extremely odd and was not tolerated. There was also a network of 4,000 markets and 80,000 shops that sold Baltic amber, Russian fur, Chinese tea, Indian spices, African ebony tree, and ivory, as well as locally produced goods made of leather, metal, silk, glass, and ceramics that could not be found anywhere else. Mauritanians and Moor, like black land, Mauritanians, Mauritanian cities of Toledo, Seville, because the Moors were ruling over those cities, And Granada were worthy competitors of Cordoba, which was the most developed area at that time. Education was common in Mauritania, Spain, and could be obtained by common citizens, whereas in Europe at that time, 99% of the population were illiterate, and even the kings were often unable to read and write. That's just like Africa today, almost. Moorish rulers lived in luxurious palaces, and monarchs of Germany, France, and England lived in large constructions similar to barns, without windows and chimneys, with a single hole in the roof for the release of smoke. So they were backward at that time. In the middle of the 10th century, that's why the black people were able to, the Mauritanians and the Moors were able to conquer Europe, because they were backward. A small group of Germans accompanied a monk to a palace reception of Abd al-Rahman III, Caliph of Cordoba. The monk delivered a letter to Caliph from Otto the Great, Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. The German travelers could not believe their eyes when they saw the splendor of Cordoba and a picturesque beauty of its outskirts and the province of Andalusia. They probably thought they had been bewitched and moved to some dreamland by magic. The road to Caliph's residence was fitted with incredible engineering technologies, equivalent of which appeared only in our time, because they could direct water flows, lakes, waterfalls, and luxurious fountains had been created along the road, just like this. You know, even this is not in every place you find them today. Like this. This was the palace that he was living in. Medina Azahara Palace of that time was estimated at 120 million and was declared a Spanish National Cultural Monument in 1923. The city of Almeria was a thriving seaport with a shipbuilding plant. All Europeans went there to trade, and as a result, so many duties were collected there that no other port could boast of. There were silk factories specializing in production of damask fabrics, brocade, and fabrics with gold and silver patterns. Thousands of artisans were involved in every direction of this large-scale skill production. The city was also characterized by the quality of glass and ceramics produced in its factories, and was notable for excellent metal products. Yeah, if you go to my book, you will see the references to all these things. So if you go to my book, How Africans Brought Civilization to Europe, you will see the references. So this is actually from my book that I'm reading now. Caliphs in the Arab Mauritanian world created enormous libraries, and intellectual life was blooming. The Caliph of Cordoba, Al-Hakam II, collected books from around the world in his palace, comprising 400 to 600,000 carefully structured volumes. He built 27 new schools for the poor, and at least at that time, girls could also attend school, and many women thrived in the fields of literature, art, education, medicine, and law. It is noteworthy that in Mauritanian schools, geography was taught with the help of globes long before Magellan's journey around the world in 1519. In the 10th and 11th century, while the whole of Europe, apart from Mauritania and Spain, had barely one public library and a couple of decent universities, Spain itself had more than 70 public libraries and 17 universities. Astronomy, chemistry, physics, mathematics, geometry, philology, geography reached the highest level in the world. Scientists and people of art joined special associations in an effort to learn. There were regular congresses in all branches of science where the latest achievements of various researches were discussed and announced. All European rulers sent expensive gifts to Mauritanian monarch Abd al-Rahman III in order to be favored in his eyes. Even kings of Rome, Constantinople, Germany, Slovenia, and other distant countries sent to him their ambassadors to petition for peace and truce, agreeing to any condition he might call. During his rule, Europeans were introduced to production of cotton. Moors also gave start to the craft of putting pictures on clothes by Mallet. British archaeologist Stanley Lane Poole tells us that students from France, Germany, and England came to Mauritanian cities to drink from the fountain of knowledge that could only be found there. It was impossible to study in medieval Europe without knowing Arabic. Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived together in harmony during the golden age of Mauritanian Spain. Now, why Arabic? Because that was the language of Islam and Quran, because they were Muslims at this point, like I explained yesterday. A separate architecture direction was formed called the Mauritania architecture. For example, Alhambra Palace Complex, like this one here, built by Moors, is now on the list of World Heritage Sites. Starting from the second third of the 19th century, Alhambra began to attract European and American Romance writers and artists in particular. It had a strong impression on Washington Irving, who lived in Spain in 1829 to 1832, as well as on George Noel Gordon Byron, Francois René de Chateaubriand, Victor Hugo, Edward Bulwer Lytton, and others. The Mauritanian style was vividly manifested later in the architecture of the European synagogues. I would also like to point out that such European scientists as Roger Bacon, an English philosopher and naturalist, Johann Kepler, a German mathematician, astronomer, mechanic, optician, and pioneer of the laws of planetary movement, all of them went there to learn. Nicolaus Copernicus, a Polish astronomer, mathematician, mechanic, economist, and author of the heliocentric system of the world, which set the beginning for the first scientific revolution, and many more others received their scientific knowledge from the works of black people, Arabs, and Berbers. They were all together at that time. In the Middle Age, Europeans received their knowledge in medicine also from the same sources. Pressure from the Christian forces on the Iberian Peninsula grew, and in 1492, Granada, the last stronghold of Moors, was taken by soldiers of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. Moors were forced out of Spain. About 3.5 million Moors were forced out of Spain territories between 1492 and 1610. About 1 million Moors settled in France. Part of them went to Holland. It is curious that according to Dutch legends, a black Moor with curly hair called Black Pet was an assistant to Santa Claus, and on St. Nicholas Day delivered gifts through chimneys. A number of Moors served at Scottish King's Court, notably in 1507, King James IV, the first king of the Renaissance era in Scotland, dressed as a black knight to participate in the royal court night tournament to win a kiss of a black lady, because it was the order of the day. It was normal for them that time to see black people ruling everywhere. In 1596, Queen Elizabeth wrote to the leaders of major cities in the United Kingdom that there were too many Moors in England and that they should be expelled. So those are the blacks who were expelled from England. For centuries, Mauritanian Spain was the center of civilization, the epicenter of development of art and science. No country in Europe at that time could achieve the level of culture that was flourishing in Spain. Thus, we were able to see that the civilization developed by black people, in particular native Africans, in its development exceeded the rest of Europe. This empire was the cultural and educational center of Europe. It took white Europeans a long time to reach the level of civilization that already existed in Mauritania and Spain at that time. Can you believe it? So blacks are not caused at all. Well, so, spread the word. Please, let's share this message. Share the message with your friends and family members. And I also want you to join the mentorship program that I do. Go to my blog, sundayadelajablog.com/mentorship. If you want to read my books, you could read them on the blog as well, sundayadelajablog.com/books. If you want to come to Africa to help us build a better Africa, on the same blog, go to sundayadelajablog.com/Nigeria. If you want to come here for some training, we do what we call History Makers Training. Come and join us by going to the same blog, sundayadelajablog.com/HMT. So we'll show you a video that will also further solidify some of these things that I've spoken about today, and then we'll come back to you tomorrow. Peace.
Out of the Western Sudan would come a great general, Tarak Ben Zad, Jabral Tarak. He would discover a weakness in Spain, fighting the Goths and the Visigoths, and the Vandals fighting among themselves. The dissident element in Spain would do something white people rarely ever do. They would sneak across into Africa and tell the Africans how weak the whites are, and said they are so weak, if you want to conquer them, it's an easy thing to do. Jabral would send a testing army, about 10,000, just to test their lines. You find it is easy. Then later, he would send 60,000. He'd take Spain. Now this is purely an African conquest. You are not dealing with the Arab conquest of Spain at first, because the Arabs were not there at first. The initial conquest of Spain was African, not Arab. That army came from the Senegamia, now Senegal, and parts of what is now Mauritania. And when they moved over and conquered Spain, Madame Bourguiba had written a book on it that bears the name Tarak Ben Zad. The Rock of Gibraltar is named after him. It's the hill or the mountain of Tarak. Gibraltar is a corruption of his name, Jabral. And she describes the army going into Spain. She says the army was black as ink. The general was blacker still. Meaning the general was the only one riding a white horse. So his blackness against that whiteness looked blacker than the rest of them. But the horse was better dressed than the kings of Europe, with silk and brocade.
Islamic armies, their ranks dominated by African converts, defeat the Romans and push on to the continent of Europe. In the process, they capture Spain. There, the Africans and Arabs create a rich, cultured, and powerful empire. So powerful, it endures for 500 years.
The achievement of the Arabs at this time is they have driven the Europeans out of the Mediterranean. The European now must go back into Europe. They have no empires, no great connections outside of Europe. And because of this, they ultimately would go into a period called the Dark Ages.
Militarily, the Africans took over Spain, and militarily, the Africans held Spain until 1240. while the Arabs did come in. But the military hold on Spain was African. Now let's look at the Africans and the Arabs, that combination called Moors in Spain. What did they do?
For a while in history, there was only two great universities. The University of St. Corey at Timbuktu and the University of Salamanca in Spain. And the African was solely in charge of the one at St. Corey and part in charge of the one at Salamanca.
They built public schools. They built public baths. They gave Spain the greatest civilization it has known before or since. They built a great university, Salamanca. They translated the great works of the masters of Europe, including a lot of works they had stolen from Africa. Europe had forgotten its own masters. The Africans translated it. But their performance and the partnership between the Africans and the Arabs and the Berbers in Spain was a long and beneficial partnership and a fine moment in their history and in world history. The African and the Arab and Islam had united and held Europe at bay for almost 1,000 years.
It's showtime! Hurry, hurry, step right up! Introducing the star of our show! His name is
Moor.
remember that history isn't the way the corporate controlled media made it look like. Read between the lines and free your mind. Revolution is the birth of equality and the antithesis to oppression.